The MVP is perhaps the NBA's most prestigious individual award. At the end of the regular season, it is given to the player who's deemed the most valuable in the entirety of the association. But among the best of a generation, value can often be relative and largely based upon perception. That is how we so often see instances of voter fatigue or polarizing controversial races that are oftentimes split right in half. This year, we have one of the most dynamic point guards in the entire NBA, leading the number one team in the Western Conference in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And on the other end, you have someone who has already been a three-time MVP, but is a generational level center, and whom has already proven that he can win at the highest level in Nikola Jokic. Welcome back to State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts. Thank you very much for tuning in. And today, what an MVP race we have on our hands. To begin, I would like to first establish the historical context of the NBA's MVP award. Because for so long, this trophy went to a player who not only had the individual performance, but also a high level of team success. And in some ways, there's a paradox within that because this is an individual award. But to truly be in consideration, you have to be considered a winning player. And with that, your team has to be doing more than just staying afloat or hovering near the bottom of the league. But in recent years, the criteria has kind of shifted away and become more free-flowing depending on the year. This really began with the MVP season from Russell Westbrook. In a year where the Oklahoma City Thunder were not near the top of their conference, but Russell Westbrook was racking up triple-doubles almost nightly, setting all kinds of individual records for his performances. And there was also a narrative behind it, because now Russell Westbrook was the guy for the Oklahoma City Thunder, a franchise that gradually became more and more his home. There was at one time a big three of Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant, and a still developing James Harden. Ultimately, Harden would get traded, and then now you have the duo of KD and Russ. But after blowing a major lead to the Golden State Warriors, the Thunder would go on to lose the services of Kevin Durant, who would actually become somewhat of a villain in the eyes of many fans, especially Thunder fans, for joining the Warriors. And that meant Russell Westbrook was there by himself now as the definitive franchise cornerstone for the Thunder. And they would go on to, of course, make the playoffs, but they were not near the top of the conference. However, because of the narrative surrounding Russell Westbrook and his individual performances and accolades, he would go on to win Most Valuable Player in the NBA. And at the time, this would go on to set a precedent moving forward that you do not have to be on one of the top three teams in the conference, but rather, if what you were doing nightly was good enough to a degree where it is evident that you are significantly impacting how well your team is doing, even in spite of maybe a lackluster roster, taking a team that might not even be a playoff team without you and leading them to the postseason, then you can be the most valuable player in the NBA. One player who is a shining example in the altered perception of this award is Jason Tatum. This is someone who is consistently a top 5 to 7 range player in the entire NBA, and he's doing it for the Boston Celtics, who annually are one of, if not the best team in not just the Eastern Conference, but the entirety of the association. Yet to this point, he has never been deemed the most valuable player in the NBA, and he's often on the outside looking in of the front runners, because what he's doing individually is not seen as impressive as the likes of Nikola Jokic. So now we've kind of established the fact of the matter of the modern day MVP award, in which there isn't necessarily a set criteria, a checklist of boxes that you need to check all of them off to win this award. However, with this MVP race, there is a chance to set forth a proper precedent. Because on one hand, you do have the man who is very individually impressive, but also has plenty of team success behind him in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the head of the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are a very youthful group, who are well beyond their age in terms of how they impact the game. This is one of the best teams in the entire NBA, and they're still very, very young. Guys like Chet Holmgren, J-Dub, they are still very much coming to their own. And in projecting 5 years down the line, a couple years ago, back when Thunder were the 10 seed, you might expect them to just then be breaking into the stratosphere of being a top team in the league. But having SGA on the team, that accelerated the development and the timeline of this team. Because of the caliber of player that he is able to elevate this team that is already very good without him and take it to one of the best in the league by virtue of being a 30-point per game scorer, and not just a 30-point per game scorer, but an efficient one at that. And at that point guard position, that is a rare commodity. And in many ways, he is the antithesis of the modern point guard because he is consistent night in, night out. He is efficient, and he does not rely too much on the three-pointer. Instead, his game is very well-rounded, and he is a highly impactful defender. So in pretty much every facet of the game, especially for his position, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is breaking barriers. And he's doing it for a team that is experiencing sky-high success. Then on the other end, you have Nikola Jokic, who by his pure generational capabilities is able to avoid voter fatigue from already being a 3-time MVP winner and still be well within the running. Every time that it looks like SGA is going to start pulling away, Nikola Jokic just does something that we have hardly ever seen before. SGA was leading the race. Jokic made a conversation by having the first 30-20-20 game in NBA history. Over 30 points, over 20 boards, over 20 assists. Not just a triple-double, but a performance that perhaps will never be replicated. Then the Thunder and the Nuggets just had a little short 2-game span of playing each other. In that first one, SGA had a great performance and led the Thunder to a sure victory. And with that being a head-to-head game, it looks like that was going to be the one that defined an MVP season for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. But in the second game of that stretch, the Nuggets win, led by an uber-impressive performance by Jokic. And every time it looks like SGA is pulling away, Nikola Jokic reels himself right back in to those conversations. And taking a look at the Western Conference, the Oklahoma City Thunder almost surely have it in hand. If they lose, it's going to be to a scorching hot Lakers team, more than likely. And you go back to 2011, and you can really see how the criteria has changed from that Westbrook MVP, because in 2011, Derrick Rose led the Chicago Bulls to the best record in the Eastern Conference over a loaded Miami Heat team with Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, and LeBron James. And maybe LeBron was more individually impressive, but Derrick Rose had all of the team success in the world, whilst also submitting himself individually into NBA superstardom. And so back in that time, SGA would have been the runaway favorite to win the MVP award at this point, by virtue of team success and being more than likely the winners of the conference. But now it's a lot more of a conversation because of that Russell Westbrook MVP and the precedent that it set. But that precedent right now is not solidified. But it will be solidified moreover with this year's most valuable player race. because every year there's still question marks about how we should view this most valuable player award. How much does team success factor in? Should Jason Tatum be a front runner? And there's not a quite sure sense of how we define the most valuable player. Russell Westbrook made it a lot more of a conversation for the individual accolades, when prior it had been mostly team success. But largely now it has been free flowing and based on narratives in recent years. But with this MVP race, you have two opposing sides of the coin. Both are very individually impressive, but SGA is probably going to get the 1 seed. The Oklahoma City Thunder are the kings of the Western Conference right now. And the Denver Nuggets, they're going to be most likely a top 4 seed, but they're not number 1, in spite of Nikola Jokic's best efforts. Obviously, both are uber impressive individually, but in terms of team success, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has the upper hand. And with the way that the MVP race has gone pre-2017, the MVP would almost assuredly be his. But with the way that the league has changed, our perception of the award has changed. Nikola Jokic is still well within the running. And no matter who wins, because this race is truly a coin toss, there are pros and cons to each, but both are generational talents. And that is a term that is often used in projecting prospects, but it really applies when you have players who are redefining what it means to be a modern point guard, in the case of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, or in the case of Jokic, redefining what it means to be a modern-day big man, and putting up stat lines that we've never seen before. Players who are without a doubt going to go down in the history books and submitting themselves to be legendary players. It is truly a coin toss as to who is most deserving of this MVP award. But whoever comes out on top with it is going to solidify the precedent. Because we have had conversations now for years, ever since Russell Westbrook's MVP. Previously, it had been mostly team success. And then after that, there had been a lot more conversations in regards to individual accolades, but nothing was set in stone. But with this, having two opposite sides, if Nikola Jokic wins, we could very well see ourselves valuing that individual performance even more. Where ultimately, if you're just that impressive, that impactful, no matter how your team is doing, as long as they're doing good enough, because of what you were able to do individually, the records that you are breaking, you can be the most valuable player. Russell Westbrook made us have that conversation to begin with, and Nikola Jokic could cement that as our criteria. However, on the other end, if SGA pulls out the MVP, we could kind of see a little bit of a reversal to the way in which the NBA was for so long. A traditional view of the MVP award, where it is given to not just someone who excels individually, but also has one of, if not the best teams in the league behind them, led by them. Because that is the show of value in not just what you do by yourself, but what you do in terms of leading the guys around you and creating something even greater than yourself. And that's where the MVP race stands today. There's not a definitive answer, but there is an individual stance and there is a more traditional stance on the award. And no matter who wins, this is perhaps the most important MVP race that we have seen in quite some time. Because given all the discussion that there has been over how this award should be determined over recent years, this race for most valuable player has the ability to set forth the tone for future award winners and what it means to be the MVP. And that is all for today's episode of State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts. Thank you very, very much for listening.